Lots of employment questions in our top story today, like can you require employees to get the vaccine? Or what if your employees don't want to return to the office? We'll have our experts weigh in. Plus, sales calls have become anything but routine, especially for those who are used to doing business in person. And like it or not, that could now mean texting. Expert Connections starts now. Is there an end in sight to working remotely? Welcome to Expert Connections. I'm Julie Holton. For many in Michigan, working from home started with a 2-week timeline, which then turned into 15 months and counting. And it's not the only big employment question that's looming right now. I'm joined by attorney Cliff Hammond of Foster Swift. Cliff, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Cliff, you focus your practice on employment law. So we have all the big questions lined up for you today, starting with how long do you think we can expect the remote work situation to continue in Michigan?
I don't think it's going to be the same as it was, obviously 15 months ago or 16 months ago, because there's going to be a lot of people who want to stay out. There's going to be some people that need to stay out, and some employers are going to say, I like it that you're out. So we're hoping that it'll be soon that you can have the choice at least.
Okay, so what if employers and employees don't see eye to eye on this? Can employees demand to continue working remotely?
Well, certainly some will. I mean, that's the point. Is the problem is that you're going to have a lot of employees that say, I like this. It's a work-life balance I really like. I like being able to take my kids to school, pick up my parents and take them to their doctor's visits or whatever I need to do. And I can get my job done as efficiently or maybe more than before. And the requirements really are going to be about what your job is. So you have to take a look at your job. Obviously, if you work in a brick and mortar store where you have to be at the store or you're in a factory, that's not going to work. It hasn't worked before. If you're in an office setting, it may be a lot different. Now, the question is, can they demand it? And the answer generally is no. You can't demand it, but there are some things that are required. And there's some accommodations based on your disability. Maybe there's some issue that you have that has to be individually resolved between the employer. So it really is going to be a case-by-case situation based on your job and what you have to do. And your employer most of the time can say no, unless there's a health concern or some other type of concern. But there could be situations that they could say, because of my fill-in-the-blank condition, you have to let me stay at home and you have to work through that. So it's going to be a little complicated for some employees.
All right, so let's talk vaccinations. Can an employer force you to be vaccinated?
Yeah, and that's the big one. Everybody wants to talk about, can I force someone to get that? And the answer generally is yes, but it's really complicated because there's always going to be the exception to the rule. Number one, what are you going to do? You're going to fire the person? Are you really going to be able to replace them? I mean, right now, there are a lot of people that are trying to find employees. So the reality is, even if you could do it, can you really afford to replace that person? So do you really want to do it from a practical standpoint, number one? From a legal standpoint, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is a federal agency that oversees disability discrimination and religious discrimination, says, be careful. You don't want to discriminate against somebody. So you have to put a policy in place if you want to do this that allows you to say, one, do we need this? Number two, is it going to be harmful? Does a person work alone or with others? Are they potentially going to hurt other people? If you're going to be around other employees, there may be a right to do so as long as you give people accommodations based on a couple things. If I can't do it because my doctor says I have a disability, are you really going to be able to fire the person? Probably not. You have to work with them. Now, if you can't work with them, if you can't have them work remotely, then there may be a very extreme situation where they can be let go or they may have to work at home. The same thing with a religious accommodation. There may be requirements to do that. And more than anything else, there is some issue that's out there looming in the backside about this is an experimental drug for all these therapies. They haven't gone through the full amounts. And so, yes, they've been approved. And there's some language that people are going to litigate about whether you can or can't. It doesn't look like that's going to be the problem for employers. But obviously on the horizon, there could be some issues about people saying, wait a minute, you're making me take something and that's not fair. I think that probably is going to be something that'll be down in the long term. But right now, the general answer is yes, but think through it.
You touched on this slightly, but I want to dig a little bit deeper. Can employers treat vaccinated employees differently than maybe non-vaccinated employees?
Well, you can't do it if it's going to discriminate. If I just say I don't want to take a vaccine because I don't want to take a vaccine, that's very, very difficult to do. You don't have protection. But if I say I'm not going to take a vaccine and I can't do it because of my doctor, how can you treat them differently? You may get yourself into a problem. So if an individual says, I want to come back to work, but I don't want to take the vaccine, and you have a rule that says you have to have a vaccine to come in, number one, you can ask if a person has a vaccine. The law allows you to do that. Where the problem comes in is why. So if you want to treat somebody differently and then you find out that the person has a disability and you want to pay people who come in more money, but the person who's working remotely still because they can't have the vaccine isn't getting paid that money, they may have a claim to say, hey, you're treating me differently because of my disability. So we have to be very careful. So the answer is you probably could allow people to have more perks, more benefits. We want to encourage people to come back to work if they're vaccinated. But if you hold people back and you don't give them those benefits because of a disability, you could have a problem because of discrimination. It's very nuanced. You have to take your time. And as an employee, it's not a very simple answer sometimes. Every job is a little bit different. Every employer is a little bit different. And every case has to be addressed that way. And if you don't, as an employee, you could be on the outside looking in saying, well, I thought I could do this. I thought I could get the same benefit. And the employer could say, no, you can't because of your job, because of your circumstance. So every circumstance is a little bit different. And I hate to say that because that's a lawyerly answer, but it's the truth. There's a lot of facts and circumstances.
Great information. Cliff, thanks so much for sharing your insights. I know you have a lot of resources available on your website. So we'll put a link to that on our website. For additional information, head to WLAJ.com/expertconnections and click the link for legal connections. Cliff, thank you.
Thank you.
The initial idea of extra time at home was a welcome respite for some, but transitions are never easy, especially one with so much uncertainty. Now, as we look toward finding our next normal, our post-pandemic life, experts say some anxiety is bound to hit again. It's the topic of today's Heart and Soul Connections. Joining me, Sylvia Williams, Michelle Hutchison, and Nancy DeBoer of She Leads Michigan. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Be here.
Michelle, you are a master's clinical social worker in the field of education with an emphasis on building neuropsychological resilience in the brain. So I really want to start with you when we're talking about COVID and the impact that it's had on our personal lives in addition to our professional lives. So as we look to this next normal, maybe getting back to a normal life again, are we going to flip the switch back to our 24/7 lifestyles?
Such a great question, Julie. The hope is that in this pandemic time, we actually would take the opportunity to slow ourselves down and really look at the way that we function individually and corporately as a society to recognize the impact on our brains and how it can be good and isolating at the same time.
Yeah, you mentioned isolation. Nancy, we've talked quite a bit about the isolation and particularly the impact on our senior community. How do you see this as we transition to our next normal?
This has been such an unusual time, Julie, with elderly people being isolated, lack of communication with each other, and that it's all been out of their own control. They didn't have any way to connect, and it was just taken away from them. Very hard.
Absolutely. And, and we talk, of course, about our seniors, especially those who maybe live alone or in senior homes where they weren't able to have visitors. Of course, we have a number of people who perhaps were isolated, those who are single or maybe single parents. And certainly this was a particularly difficult time for them when we were quarantining at home or maybe not out and about in groups as much. Sylvia, what are your thoughts on this and this isolation that it's caused?
The isolation has been, in some instances, detrimental, but I think we need to consider even the children. The young people have been affected by this. All of this, everything, because everyone has been affected by this. We are a society where we've been isolated in terms of technology. And then you had the pandemic where you couldn't go outside of your computer. And so it has weighed very heavily on society, as we can see when we listen to the news.
Absolutely. I mean, we've all been connected by technology. We're connected by technology right now, recording kind of COVID style from different locations, but that technology is not the same as being together with someone in person. Michelle, I imagine though that not all of this has been negative.
Yes, Julie, I'm so glad you said that, because there are a lot of people who have benefited from the slowing down of the pace of our society and the expectations that we put on one another. And that can be really good for our neurodevelopment and the development of relationships.
Do you think we'll bounce back, Michelle?
I-
We've talked about this before. I mean,
Yeah.
can we bounce back from this?
I absolutely believe we can bounce back. We know that our brains can grow and change. And so it's just understanding that we have to come back to a balance in brain chemicals in the way that we relate and connect. But absolutely, we can bounce back and come back even better and stronger. And, one of those ways that we talk as women of faith about bouncing back is through the use of prayer.
Yeah, the use of prayer is so interesting. Sylvia, you lead for Michigan the National Day of Prayer, among many other things that you do. Talk to us about prayer. How, for you, is prayer a part of this kind of this idea of returning to normal? How will that help people?
Prayer has been the answer for many during the pandemic, Julie. It has helped people to battle fear of the unknown, fear of not being in control. It's helped people battle anxiety and hopelessness and even isolation. Initially, when we first went into the lockdown, people rejoiced because they were able to spend more time with God in prayer. And then very shortly thereafter, we realized it was a necessity in order to make it through this. We were going to have to pray. So many people have discovered that prayer is the key to unlocking God's peace to help sustain them during these uncertain times.
Nancy, last question to you. What do you think that this time has done as far as building connections? I know we've talked about kind of this transition that we all had, over a year ago into this more, technological world to be able to connect. What do you think will happen as we start to be able to connect again in person?
We kind of have to rediscover communication. I have heard it described that people who had a little bit of a crack in their relationship turned into a chasm during this. And we have to address those kind of things as we go back into regular world. And I do think the rhythm of regular life will help us also develop more of who we are back into circulation. But we want to retain the good that we learned and the depth of some of the relationships that we've developed during this time.
Absolutely. Nancy, Sylvia, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your insights. To hear more from the women of She Leads Michigan and to connect with them, head to our website, WLAJ.com/Expert Connections. Just click on Heart and Soul Connections. If you have supported a local restaurant lately, chances are you ordered for pickup or delivery on a website. Or perhaps you dined in and scanned a QR code for the menu. But I wonder how many servers had to teach patrons how to scan that QR code? Or what about customers who don't have a smartphone? It's just one example of why businesses need to pay close attention to who they're marketing to make sure their technology and their messaging is on target. Joining me now to talk about generational differences are marketing connections experts, Paul Schmidt from UnoDeuce Multimedia, Jesse Flores of SuperWebPros, and Tim Haynes of Symposia Labs. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Julie. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Okay, so first, I need to say that we're not saying by any means that you have to be young to master technology, but it is a fact that millennials and Gen Z have grown up with the internet. Jesse, I want to start with you. What does this mean for the purchasing habits?
Yeah, great question. So, many of us probably still think of like millennials as these punk college kids, right? But the reality is that they are now in their 30s. They are starting to become a pretty active part of the population, and purchasing power is actually shifting pretty dramatically in that direction. not only are millennials starting to come into their purchasing power, they also generally tend to be the best, most well-educated population segment, and also the highest on average income earners out there. So even though right now the baby boomers still have more purchasing power in raw dollars per capita, millennials definitely have more money. And so what does that mean? That means that, first of all, these are digital natives who think about things very, very differently. They vote or they purchase not just based on whether or not it's a cool gadget, but whether or not it supports their values. Their ethical and political considerations factor into their purchasing decisions by and large. They also are really into omni-channel shopping. So they like to shop local, but they do expect the local business to be as on point as Amazon, right? They're happy to patronize them, but you better have a website that they can go to and check things out before they come into your store. So it's a dramatic shift in the economy, a dramatic shift in purchasing power, and certainly a lot of shifting in behavior.
And of course, it's really important to know if you're targeting millennials, and I think we have a few of them on this panel right now, but if you're targeting millennials, we need to know where to reach them, right? So Tim, when it comes to marketing to different generations, what is the role of user experience? We hear that a lot in marketing.
So COVID has acted as, I think, the final catalyst in that digital revolution that Jesse is referencing. Even my mom has come to expect that she can order products from even the smallest store online. If you're playing that pinch and zoom game on your phone, you're getting frustrated very quickly with the brand you're interacting with, and you're having a bad user experience. So user experience is critical because it's often the first encounter that someone has with your brand.
And of course, we need that first encounter to be a good one. Paul is our resident storyteller here. How does video play a role in marketing to different generations?
Well, video has been kind of like the buzzword over the past year, especially, and it's become the most ubiquitous tool, even more so because of the simple fact that you use it for entertainment, social media, and now even communications. And how does that really delve into the generational aspect? Well, then it becomes more of a platform-driven situation than actual, the media aspect. Is we're choosing a platform, and you have all these different ages using similar platforms in different ways. I mean, and also you got to look at the time frame that you're sitting in front of a screen. You have YouTube and you have TikTok. They may have different video links and so on and so forth, but you may sit there for the same amount of time. And that's two generational platforms that people drive to. And so that is one of the biggest aspects to this generational marketing, is the fact that, you spend about the same amount of time, whether you're a millennial or Gen Z or even a boomer. It's just where you're spending it. And that's the ubiquitousness of video in today's world.
And of course, we've seen video growing in importance when this has been really the main medium for us to be able to connect, whether it's live video streaming or connecting through recorded videos online on these platforms, as you mentioned. Jesse, real quickly, I want to come back to you. What do you see as kind of the future with generational marketing?
I think the future, to Tim's point, I think it's going to be user experience. So everybody checks out everyone gets Googled before they do business with you. So I think it's going to be a combination of user experience, but also in-store customer experience, especially for local businesses. I would expect to see technology integrated across the platform from the moment someone discovers you to the moment they pay their bill. I mean, everything there is a touch point. And I think that's probably where the future of this is going to be. I should be able to do anything I need to do with a person and on my phone. So make it easy for me to do both.
Wow, absolutely. And of course, we've seen a hybrid of these things throughout COVID. It'll be really interesting to see what sticks around even once the pandemic is over. Jesse, Tim, Paul, thank you so much for sharing your insights. And, Paul mentioned TikTok and YouTube. In last week's episode, we talked about using video in various platforms, and that really ties into generational marketing. If you'd like to check that out, head to our website, see more from our experts at WLAJ.com/expert connections. Just click the link for marketing connections. We have all received that dreaded cold call or email. The wrong wording at the wrong time can really shut down a potential deal for good. But with the right shift in strategy, you can still sell in spite of COVID. Our sales connections expert, Sherry Pash, is here to talk about prospecting effectively during the pandemic. Hi, Sherry. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Julie. Thanks for having me. And I'm excited to talk about this whole prospecting and generating sales calls during these days.
It's such an important topic, especially with us relying so heavily on technology right now. And this has been a major hang-up for even the best people in sales, making connections without being able to travel to see someone in person. So where do we start, Sherry?
Well, I think it's always best to start, Julie, is we have to start with the basics of, we have to know who we're calling on, right? That research that we do, a lot of salespeople want to jump right into making sales calls, but we have to know something about that prospect or customer. So that knowledge, we have to gain knowledge about the customer or client before we really start to think about making a sales call, right?
Okay, so talk to us a little bit more about that knowledge. What are some of those key things that we should research?
So really, when you talk about knowledge, Julie, and you ask that good question, is we want to know about the customer and client, and we want to do our research online. We need to know before we ever go see them some of the basics about them and their business. They expect us to know that at this point even. So when we talk about knowledge, for example, if you have a person that you are selling to in your local economic area, you want to know how many offices do they have? How large is their footprint maybe? How long have they been in business? Are they financially strong? Really key one, Julie, I know helps a lot of my clients is who's on the leadership team of the company you're selling to? And what do you know about that leadership team? Do you have shared connections, right? That type of thing.
So important, Sherry. In fact, let's put together an extra web extra on this. We can dive deeper into this, and we'll post that on our website because it's so important to be able to get that research done.
And there's so much that we could talk about. So I'm excited. I'll do kind of a mini training on this. And because it's also important to know that when you are analyzing or doing that research, we don't want analysis paralysis, where we do so much research, we never make a call. And I've seen that happen in companies where they just want to know everything, and you just can't know everything.
Right. Okay. So the research is done. Now what? What's the next step?
Well, now we run into that email voicemail system so often, right? We want to reach out. We send them an email. We send them a voicemail. I don't get a reply. I don't get a return call. We want to make sure, are we being transactional or are we being relational in our emails and our voicemails? As an example, I do a lot of work with nonprofit organizations that have members. So you might think about a voicemail. I'm calling to see about renewing your membership. Or am I calling to see how we might remain a part of your business strategy next year? Relational versus a transaction. So that's really important. I said leave an email or voicemail, right, Julie? There's a lot more ways that people are doing business now, aren't there? There's text messaging, social media. That's that knowledge we just talked about. Do we know how our people that we want to do business with work?
Well, and let's just pause for a moment, because what if I don't want to text? What if or what if, we joke a lot about generational differences, but, some generations are more into texting than others, perhaps. Some are more into phone calls than others. So, what's your strategy here? What if I don't want to text?
And that's where people have to stop and think, because it can be generational or it can just be work style, right? I love the technology piece of it, but there's some people who don't want to do business that way. So really it comes down to expectations. Who do you want to do business with? And if that's how they communicate, you may have to figure out, how do you do this? This is where interns can come into play. And I love when you can bring an intern into your operation or into your work, and they can mentor you and you can mentor them, going both directions really, because you have to figure out a way to communicate with your potential customer or client, even if it's not the method that you want to learn or do work with. So I say bring in people who can help you with that. There's a lot of different firms that can help you, but try interns even. And it's not as hard as it seems. But the most important piece is the knowledge piece. We have to know how our client and customer wants to communicate. And that can be by industry, but it can also be by the type of position they're in.
What a great point. It may not be what style I want to communicate in, but I need to be able to connect with that potential client in the way they want to be communicated with. Okay, so one last question, Sherry. As we're preparing for this, what types of things should I be anticipating? What types of ways can the conversation go?
Well, I always recommend that people anticipate objections that potential customer or client may have, and anticipate questions they may have. Then you're not caught off guard, and you're consistent within your company, even how you respond to certain objections, how you respond to certain questions. And you want to be prepared for that. So have a little session with your team on managing objections and what kind of questions by customer or member segment do we receive, and are we ready to respond to those?
This is so helpful, Sherry. Thank you. And we mentioned kind of doing that web extra on all of those questions and things that you should research and get to know, because I know you have so much information to provide there. So we'll go ahead and do that, and we'll put that online for everyone. Just head to WLAJ.com/expertconnection and click the link for Sales Connections. Buying a home in a hot real estate market takes patience. Having a savvy real estate agent doesn't hurt either. I caught up with Lansing area realtor Amy Jackson to dig a bit deeper on how to navigate this market.
Well, there's no secret that our market is thriving right now. Our home values are up, even just in the last month, almost 20% in some of our area counties. The buyer who really wants to settle into a home for a few years, this is a great time to buy a home. Now, there's some challenges, and we can definitely talk through the ways to make your offer as strong as possible. But if you're going to be there for a few years, you really want to lock in that interest rate. Think about it. Homeowners that bought their home just a couple years ago, if they were to get the rate that we have now, they would have already been 7 years off their loan. So you're ahead of the game if you can purchase a home now and lock in a great interest rate, especially knowing that you're going to be in your home for a few years. From the seller's perspective, it's a great time to sell because inventory is low. But what we also are seeing, because there are so many buyers out there and not enough inventory, is that we are getting some buyers who have buyer's remorse. So you really want to make sure that your realtor is advocating for you, researching the offers, making sure that they're strong all the way around, and just making sure that as you go through the process that you get to that closing table with as few, if any, hiccups at all.
And to those who might be feeling intimidated by this market, Amy says,
well, it might be a little intimidating, and that's true. But when you have a good team behind you, that's really the most important factor. A lot of times we're intimidated because we don't know all the details. So when you have a good lender and you have a good realtor at your side, can really guide you through the entire process to make you feel empowered by this great decision that you're making.
Watch the full interview with Amy at WLAJ.com. Thank you for joining us for Expert Connections. I'm Julie Holton. We'll see you back here next Monday.
Expert Connections is executive produced by MConnexions Marketing Agency in collaboration with Foster Swift Law Firm. Strategic Solutions for Growth. SuperWebPros, Symposium Labs, UnoDeuce Multimedia, and She Leads Michigan. A special thank you to our Style Connections partners, Polka Dots Boutique, The Standard Spa, and Beauty by Wilder. Visit our Style Spotlight online at WLAJ.com/Expert Connections.